First of all, I want to thank you and the audience for being here, for getting through the barricades, the traffic, the escorts, all the stuff that was going on. So thank you for being here. For those of you at home, thank you for making your way from the kitchen to the living room so you can watch this at home. I'm very proud to be here as a member of the Historical Society, because the whole mission of the society is to bring history alive about the people of San Francisco. And boy, do we have lots of wonderful people to talk about. But of course, I'm going to talk about four of my favorite ladies of San Francisco who left a legacy which is still with us today. And I'm going to start with Lotta Crabtree. So, 1853, Mary Ann Crabtree arrived in Grass Valley with her 6-year-old daughter Lotta, joining with John Crabtree, who had come out 2 years earlier to look for his fortune. All John found here was where the saloons were, and apparently he visited quite a few of them. He wasn't even there to meet Mary Ann when she arrived in San Francisco, so she had to wait for a while for him to get down and meet with her and bring her up to Grass Valley. So they went up to Grass Valley, and they started a boarding house, which was their source of income for much of the time. During that time, one of the neighbors at the boarding house was Lola Montez, and I could do a whole story about her. But Lola was she was a courtesan, a world traveler. She knew lots of people in social circles in Europe, and she basically had to beat a hasty retreat from Bavaria when her lover, the Prince of Bavaria, King Ludwig actually, was found face down in the lake. And the family blamed her for it, but actually it was probably the family who did him in because he was spending all the money. But anyway, but Lola was a wonderful actress and singer, and she heard little Lotta singing one day, and she suggested to the mother that she could teach Lotta some songs. So she did, and she really encouraged Lotta to sing. And then Mary Ann, the mother, also realized that Lotta liked to dance, so she enrolled her in a little dance school, which is off of a bar in town. And the name of the fellow was Jared Reynolds, an Irishman, who gathered a bunch of children together and was teaching them some simple Irish jigs. Well, one day after lessons, he saw that Lotta had a real talent for dancing and showmanship. So he decided to take Lotta to a local mining camp and have her perform for the miners. And by the way, he didn't tell the parents he was going to do this. So he put her in a buggy. They went up to a local camp and set up a little stage where Lotta sang and danced, and the men loved her. And they started throwing bags of gold dust and coins onto the stage, quarters, and Jared collected them and then brought Lotta back that evening. Well, many of these miners had wives and children back at home, and when Lotta sang these little sweet songs, you could see their weather-beaten faces just streaming tears, because she was reminding them of their home and their family. So that's why they were so enamored with her singing. And this shot, by the way, is from a TV series that was done, the Wagon Train, and they had one episode about Lotta, and I have to say the young child actress did a great job in portraying her. But anyway, the men loved her, and when he brought her back, of course, the parents are furious until they saw all the gold that she had earned that evening. And at that very point, Mary Ann decided that she was going to be the stage manager for little Lotta. So she now started taking Lotta to the mining camps throughout the gold country. And she even swept the stage after a show for any gold dust that might have fallen out of the bags. And if you want to get a sense of Lotta's talents, what I suggest you do is go to YouTube and look at Shirley Temple dancing with Bill Bojangles Robinson. It's a phenomenal view of another child star, but it gives you an idea of the talent of both these child phenomenons, how good they were, how natural they were on stage. So after touring the mining camps for several years, Mary Ann decided it was time for Lotta to perform in San Francisco. The family moved there in 1856. Lotta performed first at the Gaieties Theater and Saloon, and then later at the Bella Union, seen here next to Portsmouth Square. This photo is actually before taken before it burned down, and then they rebuilt it. And that's when Lotta performed there. So by now, Lotta was singing, playing the banjo, and becoming a hilarious mimic. Within 3 years, she was billed as San Francisco's favorite, and she was. Being a beautiful young woman with red hair, sweet face, and a fun personality, Lotta was attracting many young men who would wait to see her at the stage door after every performance. But Lotta's mother always shooed them away, partly because marriage might end Lotta's career, and also because by the age of 12, Lotta had been supporting her parents and 2 brothers. As a teenager, Lotta was developing a style of performance which made her so popular. For example, she could play the innocent tease while dancing, then sing a naughty song and raise her dress to put coins thrown on the stage in her stockings, a rather shocking thing to do in Victorian era. Lotta performed at a number of theaters around the city, such as this one, the California Theater on Bush Street. Some of the venues where she performed were low-class music halls called melodeons. But Mary Ann had no trouble booking Lotta at these places because they drew large audiences. The men loved Lotta's body sense of humor. In 1864, Mary Ann decided that Lotta, a teenager now, was ready for serious acting roles. So the family moved to New York, where Lotta performed in plays such as Uncle Tom's Cabin and Little Nell and the Marchioness, which was a play based on Dickens' Old Curiosity Shop. But what Lotta loved the most was to perform in musical comedies where she could surprise the audience by performing mischievous routines, smoking cigars, wearing pantaloons, sometimes singing naughty ballads. And she could play a teenager up until her 30s. In the play Little Detective, Lotta played 3 different roles and became known for her quick changes. Here she is playing a young man and an old woman. Here's a bill from the 1880s showing her playing 6 different roles. By now, she was earning $5,000 a week and was the highest paid female performer in the United States. Lotta had a great love of animals, and she donated money to many humane societies. She had this drinking fountain built for dogs in Boston, where she lived later in life. So that is by Charles River in Boston, still being used. Lotta never forgot her start in San Francisco, and her final performance in the city was at Lotta Crabtree Day at the Panama Pacific exhibition in 1915, which drew a huge crowd. She left a gift to the city, which was the newly refurbished fountain on Market Street for horses to drink from. It, of course, became known as Lotta's Fountain. Lotta's Fountain was where the survivors of the 1906 earthquake gathered, looking for friends and relatives and leaving notes. So her fountain is the focus of the commemoration each year of the great earthquake and fire held every April 18th at exactly 5:12 in the morning. And this was taken last year. You can see Mayor Breed just to the left of the statue in her black Victorian dress. And there's the sheriff of San Francisco giving a little talk. So what happens is they give a little talk about what happened that fateful day. And then there's a moment of silence, and exactly at 5:12, all the fire engines surrounding the fountain sound their sirens right next to the Palace Hotel. And then they go and paint the fire hydrant up on near Church Street, which remained active in the fire. They were able to say part of the Mission District because of that fire hydrant. So some of us that participate in that commemoration every year are a group of reenactors representing the survivors of the earthquake who picked themselves up, rolled up their sleeves, and stayed to rebuild the city, which they did within 10 years. Here we are at the Palace Hotel having breakfast at 6 a.m., joining the three or four other guests who were up at that hour. Third from the left is my friend who plays Lotta Crabtree, and third from the left is myself playing Domingo Ghirardelli Jr. And you know, the city officials really like us being there because we are representing, we talk about all the terrible disaster and all the bad things that happened that day, but there were so many good things that happened too, like the Army taking in so many people at the Presidio and sheltering them, and people looking out for one another and helping each other out, and rebuilding the city. So that's what we try to represent. The rise of the Phoenix, right? Lillie Coit was born in New York in 1843 and was brought to California by her parents, Martha and Charles Hitchcock. Here's Lillian and her mother in an early daguerreotype. Charles was an Army surgeon who, by the way, operated on Jefferson Davis and saved his life in the Mexican-American War. After the war, he left military service and became a well-known doctor in San Francisco. Now, San Francisco, as you know, in the 1850s suffered a number of great fires which burned down hundreds of buildings in the city. Volunteer fire companies were formed to keep fires from spreading and from being so ruinous. These fire companies were volunteers. They were in manly competition with one another and raced to be the first to put water on the fire. They prided themselves in their uniforms and equipment, mostly paid for by themselves. And as you can see, this is the Eureka Fire Company. To fight fires at that time, the company would have an engine, which was basically a hand pumper with a water reservoir, which had to be filled with water buckets. It was pulled to a fire using ropes and manpower. And you can see this engine and others at the fire department's museum on the Presidio, on Presidio Avenue, which is really a great place to visit. One day, Lillie, at the age of 15, was on her way home when she saw the short-handed Knickerbocker Volunteer Company struggling to get their engine up Telegraph Hill. She quickly grabbed the rope and helped pull the engine, all the while encouraging men passing by to help. Then she stood by to encourage them to help them extinguish the fire. From then on, the company made her their mascot. At every parade, you'd see her riding on one of the pumpers. As an adult, Lillie would accompany the firefighters to a fire and bring coffee and sweets. She would visit injured firemen in the hospital and bring flowers to funerals of fallen firefighters. Her proudest moment was in 1863 when she was given a leather helmet and an honorary badge by the Knickerbockers. Even when going to social occasions, Lillie would wear her badge on her belt to show her membership in a very exclusive fraternity. After her husband died, and in her later years, Lillie could be found playing cards and smoking cigars with Mr. Ralston, or visiting at the court of the French emperor. But her heart was always in San Francisco. In her will, she left 1/3 of her estate to the beautification of San Francisco. The city fathers decided to build a tower in her honor and employed the architects Arthur Brown and Henry Temple Howard to build it on Telegraph Hill. It was built in an Art Deco style, and I'm sure you join me in telling tourists it's not built like a fire nozzle. It's just built in an Art Deco style. Inside, of course, are the murals that were painted by prominent artists during the Depression, depicting the lives of workers, writers, women, and businessmen of that period. And they're still as fresh as they were first painted. Lillie also bequeathed funds for the erection of a statue to honor the firefighters of the city, which stands on the western side of Washington Park. Alma de Bretteville was born in 1881 on a farm in what is now the Sunset District. She was the daughter of Danish immigrants who always lived on the edge of poverty. Well, I was thinking about that. I'm thinking, if you're trying to grow things in the Sunset District, no wonder you're starving. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was different back then, but that was a tough place to make a living. In her late teens, she was taking classes at the Mark Hopkins Art Institute, where her statuesque beauty, she was 6 feet tall, caught the eye of artists and photographers. To help the family finances, she began to pose, sometimes in the nude, for artists who created tastefully risque paintings for the city's saloons. She caught the eye of sculptor Robert Aiken, who hired her as a model for a Goddess of Liberty, which was to adorn the top of the Dewey Monument in Union Square. The monument was to commemorate Admiral Dewey's victory at Manila Bay in the Spanish-American War. Aiken needed a tall, lithe beauty for the Goddess of Victory, and Alma was perfect. Here is the goddess holding a trident representing Dewey and an olive wreath for peace representing President McKinley. This is probably the closest you've ever seen it, right? Now, among those on the Arts Committee to commission statue was Adolph Spreckles, whose sugar company made him very, very wealthy. He became infatuated with Alma and courted her for 5 years, despite the fact that he was 24 years her senior. He took her on trips to Europe and lavished many gifts on her. And this was the origin of the term sugar daddy. He finally gave in to her demands for marriage, and they were wed in 1909, and they had a son, Adolph Jr. The two of them toured Europe together, and while visiting the Louvre, Alma became enamored with French art and architecture. Among the many artists she befriended was Auguste Rodin, whose sculptures fascinated her. By now, Alma was a well-known socialite and benefactor to the city. She convinced her husband to build an art museum as a cultural gift to the city. It was also to be a memorial to the 3,600 California soldiers who died in World War I. The museum, of course, is the well-loved Legion of Honor in Lincoln Park. It opened in 1924 with Alma presiding at the ceremony. Now you know why the Thinker is out there, because she loved all of Rodin's sculptures, and she brought one here to be part of at the entrance to the Legion. But, she was always thinking of other people, and she didn't want to forget American artists, so she organized an exhibit of 300 American sculptors from around the country to display their work in the late 1920s at the Legion. She also funded the building of the Maritime Museum at Aquatic Park to tell the maritime history of San Francisco. Naturally, the building was fashioned in the form of a ship. It is now operated by the National Park Service. And it's another one of those small treasures of San Francisco because it has so many artifacts of the maritime era. And you probably all visited, but if you haven't, I highly recommend you do. It's free and it's wonderful. Mr. Spreckles had this elegant mansion built in 1912 for the family in Washington Street. During the war years, Alma would collect unused clothing and shoes from socialites she knew and sell them in the yard to raise money for war-torn France. She died in 1968 at the age of 87. Today, the home is the home of writer Danielle Steele, who, by the way, has her own foundations, one to provide help for the mentally ill and one to provide help to the homeless. By the way, it's hard to see the building anymore because hedges now have surrounded the whole building. And so you have to look at old pictures to get the full view of the house. So this is Mayor Roger Lapham, who was elected on a platform of bringing more efficiency to city government. And you know what I was thinking when I saw this photo is that the first thing you should do is hire a clerk to help with all that paperwork. Anyway, in January of 1947, he announced that the city should get rid of its cable cars as soon as possible, claiming that they were losing $200,000 a year. He said they were accident-prone and inefficient. He knew there were sentimental reasons for keeping the cars, but he said, sentimentalists do not pay the bills. He wanted to replace them with buses, which he claimed were cheaper to run than cable cars. He had the backing of the supervisors and the Public Utilities Commission, but he never consulted the public or reacted to the report that buses going up steep Powell Street would slide down the slippery bricks when it rained. All these men were never prepared for the likes of Friedel Klussman. Friedel was a longtime resident of the city who was appalled at the idea of taking out the remaining cable cars. Appearing before the Board of Supervisors, she said that people did not come to San Francisco to ride buses. They came to ride the cable cars. She then refuted the mayor's statistics with an independent auditor's report that said streetcar and bus accidents far outnumbered any by the cable cars. She reminded them that the cable cars did not lose money. Yes, they cost money, but the money was made up for by attracting thousands of tourists to the city every year to ride the cable cars. She formed the committee to save the cable cars and marshaled 27 Williams clubs to join the fight. Mayor Lapham retaliated by filling buses with women for photo ops and giving them free rides, saying it's so much nicer to shop using a bus. Not to be outdone, the Committee to Save the Cable Cars began a petition campaign to have the issue placed on a ballot for the citizens to have a say. And I love that guy on the right who's giving them a piece of his mind about this petition. More and more citizens joined the fight, bringing thousands of signed petitions to the registrar. Proposition 10 was now going to be up for a vote. The committee organized a media blitz that rivaled Madison Avenue. Posters, ads, and endorsements by companies like Gump's Department Store filled the papers and airwaves. Even the Ice Follies got in on the bandwagon, or should I say the running board. The committee hired actors to portray weeping French aristocrats to ride the cable cars. Now, why do you suppose they hired actors to portray French aristocrats? Can you guess? They didn't want to see cable cars on the chopping block. Pretty clever, eh? Well, victory came when the election was held. The vote was 3-1 in favor of amending the city charter to require the Public Utilities Commission to maintain the 3 cable car lines that were owned by the city. Now, I should mention that the California line was operated by a separate company, which was losing money and was eventually acquired by the city's municipal railway. And by the way, I'm just going to mention that this is the 150th anniversary of the cable car. And if you haven't seen the celebration we had at Powell and Market back in August, you can see it if you go to Clay Street Cable Car 150th anniversary. you'll see yours truly portraying Mr. Halliday. I practiced a month on my Scottish accent. But they wanted to remind people that it was the innovation of just one man who changed transportation in the city forever. And you can ride the California line this year up until the end of the year for $5. And you have on and off privileges, so take advantage of it. And I have to mention Mayor Feinstein, the late Mayor Feinstein, because when she was mayor, she really worked hard to rebuild the deteriorating cable car system in the 1980s. She enlisted the help of major corporations such as the Atari Corporation. Remember Pac-Man? There's Pac-Man. So they donated funds, and she got the state to contribute and the federal government to contribute. And they helped to rebuild. They just took the whole system apart and rebuilt all the rails and roads, and they combined 3 of the lines into 2. And they kept the California line running, of course. So we've seen how some lady philanthropists gave money to build monuments or buildings as a testament to the love of our city. Friedel Klussman gave of herself, devoting hundreds of hours of her time and energy to save the cable cars. It's a real testament to citizen participation for a common good. In 1964, the cable cars were listed as a national landmark, one of only 2 moving transit landmarks in the U.S. Do you happen to know what the other one might be? Any of you trivia experts? The streetcar in St. Louis, in New Orleans, yes. The St. Charles streetcar line. So the next time you take a cable car, ask the gripman to give a couple of classy rings for Friedel Klussman, the lady who saved the cable cars. And that's it, so we'll have a little question and answer. Thank you. So I'd like you to only ask questions that I can answer.
All right, just make eye contact and we'll go from there. Let me just say a little bit about Friedel. I just remember her as a child, and she was this kind of dowdy character who was making, early black and white news things, and he was in the paper all the time and so forth. We have a member who's not here tonight, I'm surprised, who knew her very well. This woman lived on Telegraph Hill, and Friedel would call her husband, who had been president of the Telegraph Hill Owners Association, whatever it was called, and call at 6:30 in the morning. Friedel would be on the phone. I need to do this. I need you to do this. I'm going to do this. Yeah. So she doesn't appear to be the firebrand that she was, but I have to offer that little bit of story because I've heard the story, and I'm repeating it poorly because the person who tell the story is not here. Okay. All right, from there, let's move forward. We have questions. Yes.
I've heard a rumor several times that the statue in Union Square and the Dewey Monument is actually not Alma Spreckles. Have you heard that rumor, or do you know anything about that?
I haven't heard it, and I'm sure that people make up these stories, but that's all the research I've done was that she really was the model for that.
I've always heard it that way as well. So.
And you probably all know that Union Square got its name because of the rallies for the Union. As soon as we got word that Fort Sumter had been fired upon by Pony Express 10 days after it happened, they had a big rally, first at Kearny and Market and then at today's Union Square. Thousands of people showed up. So this really was a Union town for the most part.
Union in the sense of the Union versus the Confederate, as opposed to organized labor. It was also a very organized labor town as well. But
I bet I can anticipate one of your questions was Mary Ann a control freak, and she controlled her daughter just for her own purposes. Well, here's how I look at it. She really wanted Lotta from the very beginning to be a star. And so she encouraged her all along the way. Sometimes Lotta would get stage fright. So she would, talk to her and encourage her. And then once Lotta got on the stage, she was fine. And she also was a very clever investor, so that when they would go to these towns and made a lot of money, she would find out what properties were available and buy a property and put them in Lotta's name. So that's why when Lotta died, she had $4 million, which was an incredible amount of money in the 1880s. So, part of it probably was self-interest, because obviously she was earning a living from her daughter, but the two of them really, from all that I've read, really loved one another, and I think she did have Lotta's best interest at heart, especially that she was investing all this money she was making for Lotta's benefit later.
Would you put the three women who created the Save the Bay Association kind of in the same category? And also, why didn't you wear your bowler hat tonight?
Yeah, I should have, huh? Yeah, well, it's real interesting how many times in history it's women who have changed things around. And you're right, that could be a whole story in itself, because it seemed like so many women were involved in the environmental movement. Like, think of Rachel Carson, thank you, who wrote that woke people's eyes up to what was happening with pollution. And so many scientists and leaders that were female really made an effect on the history of the United States. So maybe sometime we'll do a talk on them. Because we still have to save the Bay. It's still being invaded and polluted and so on. And I think that should be brought to people's attention more and more. So thank you for mentioning that.
It seems like the women that were brought to mind with the mention of Save the Bay, I can think of the Freeway Revolt, some others where these were not just lost causes, they were non-causes, that there was no advocacy against the freeways until these women showed up, and that there's something, I guess, inherent in being a woman, that you're not reluctant to stand up to the man, and thank God they did. Visualize how freeways would have destroyed San Francisco, right. How the Bay would have been different. There are a couple other examples floating around in my head, but I'll leave it to you for the next presentation to bring that up.
Yeah, thank you. And Friedel, was a very uncommon woman, because she wasn't afraid of these powerful men. She knew right from the beginning what she wanted to do, and she wasn't intimidated at all, which was to her credit. And she became a model for a lot of other women too, I think, because of her audacity, really. Because she was dismissed. All the men dismissed her. Well, you're just a housewife, what do you know about politics? Right. What do you know about this and that? But she showed she had a lot of moxie, and she knew how to use the media for her cause.
And it's interesting too, because you look at her, of course it's the Times and all that kind of stuff, but she's unassuming. She is not 6 foot tall and slender and beautiful. I mean, she's just a firebrand. But she comes off as a public person, in the photos at least, that she just is logical and tenacious, and she doesn't lose her cool. She just stayed on her topic. And then she was behind the scenes doing a lot of stuff. I only know that from the story I heard of how she was up at dawn and calling people at home, and not,
yes.
She was not looking for public. She didn't, I don't know if she particularly liked being out in the public, but she was definitely one who was working behind the scenes all the time.
Yes.
Speaking of the Times, I noticed in the newspaper article that you showed of the results of the election. Down at the bottom, they quoted Mrs. Hans Klussman. So that was the sexism of the time, obviously.
That's how she was, and all the
was billed.
newspapers and so on, that's how she was identified.
Yeah.
But I made a point of calling her
front.
Friedel.
We have a question here. Or do you have a question?
Did Lotta Crabtree ever get married or have a family or
She did not. She was so taken by her career that, and of course at the beginning her mother shunted all those men away, but she never seemed to really need a man's attention, because she was getting it from the audience, and that's what kept her going. So no, she never married. She lived with her mother and brothers at this beautiful house in New Jersey. You can go online and see it. This beautiful house was just sold for $3.5 million. It's near Lake Hopatcong in New Jersey, and she had a sailboat. She would take family out for sailing. She went to France to learn to paint, and she learned French. So she kept active. She retired at 47 because she fell off the stage and injured herself rather badly, so she couldn't perform. But she did manage to come out to San Francisco for that final performance because she wanted to be here for that.
We have an online question?
To your knowledge, did any of the four ladies know of each other or ever meet, or have you read anything about that?
Well, Lotta died before Lillie came into prominence, so I don't think they ever met.
I know there's overlaps.
Yeah, there was a lapse. No, I don't think they ever met. Well, Alma died in 1924, so that was before.
Now we have an online question.
Well, we owe a great debt to these ladies, and I hope you will, honor them by going to the Legion of Honor and supporting them because they're supporting what she started, and also visiting the Maritime Museum, which, they don't charge, but the Park Service always loves donations, and of course, ride a cable car. Maybe not tonight, but some other time.
I was going to add one little bit, and I thought you would have shown the picture, was at the Panama Pacific Exposition in 1915. That was the first scaled-down replica of the Palace of Legion of Honor in France. And so she got that inspiration, and so when there was going to be something to be done, of course she didn't get to it until the war is over and all that kind of stuff. And then in the early 20s, they start building the building. It's completed in 24, but it's very close replica of what was at the Panama Pacific Exposition.
Yeah.
Slight door differences, but boy, I have that postcard versus what they finally ended up with. And you've got to really study it to realize that there's a difference. Now they've added gates and for security and so forth, but it really is quite amazing thing. And that was the French Pavilion in 1915. So, and definitely Alma's money was making it happen.
Yeah.
Question over here. Yes, it's a copy of the one in Paris is done as the French Pavilion at the Panama Pacific Exposition in 1815. From there, it then becomes, so I was unclear in the way I said that.
You mentioned, Howard, that she died in 1924. That's way too early. She died in 54 or something,
Yes.
58,
Yes,
64.
thank
Yeah.
I don't know what, but
Yeah.
she's yeah.
24 was the completion of the,
68. She died in 1968.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
what you said in your talk, but it got lost at the end here. So, yeah.
Thank you.
She was a interesting, she's 6 foot tall, so she was quite imposing. And I asked a relative at an event she had a daughter, and her daughter never attained the same height, but because she was her daughter, it was Little Alma. The whole family called her Little Alma, so she named her after herself. So rather interesting how that all played out. But a 6 foot tall woman
Yeah.
in the turn of the century, of that century, but she was, she filled out over time. She was a little bit on the thin side on the top of that monument, but sorry, story. All right, so.
Well, I want to thank you all again for coming
questions?
tonight. It was really, thank you for supporting
Right.
us.